Welcome into another Key of David podcast. I've got my two compadres, David the Lion Douglas and Trevor Keys. Trevor is mobile, so you'll see Trevor. This is what's cool about doing these podcasts on Zoom is he's just bouncing around. And we have an amazing guest for you today. Many of you know him. If you haven't been to his channel, go subscribe. He's got amazing stuff. It's Thoughtful Saint, I believe, and we got Jacob Hansen with us today. And I'm really excited for this one. And again, like we told everybody, we're looking to take both sides of the argument. And clearly, polygamy is still a very, very hot topic. So, Jacob, welcome to the Key of David podcast.
Thanks. Thank you guys very much for having me. And it's Thoughtful Faith is actually the podcast.
I messed up. There's another guy that calls it Thoughtful Saints, huh? He's the
well, I have a Facebook group that I moderate that's called Thoughtful Saints. So a lot of times people are in that group. And then and then the YouTube channel is called Thoughtful Faith.
What's your Twitter handle? What's your Twitter handle?
Twitter handle is also Thoughtful Saint.
Yeah.
So now we have it all.
I see you just destroying people nonstop, dude.
I'm a little more embarrassed about my profile on Twitter. If you want to see me kind of at my worst when I'm just like flying off the handle saying stuff, that's kind of what you get. Plus, I kind of like to play around more on Twitter, and
I can tell you're just out there poking the bear.
I always tell people, if you want to see me kind of at my snarky joking around, kind of not being serious, follow me on Twitter. But if you want to see what I actually think, go watch my channel.
Well, I appreciate the work you're doing. One of the first videos that I saw was you on Word Radio. And so you'll often pop in there. And then I was able to find your channel and just love your perspective. I really love the video you did, and we probably won't get into this. It was divided and confused, I think it was. Yeah. I just felt like that was authentic and vulnerable, and it really spoke to me because it's kind of how I feel too. So I appreciate you having the courage to like put yourself out there. I know that, people can shoot arrows. The arrows that are shot today aren't the physical ones. They're the comments in YouTube videos and on social media. So well, let's jump right into the hot topic, which is polygamy. And there's been this massive movement over the past, I don't know, couple of years. We've got YouTube channels like 132 Problems, Michelle Stone, we've got Jacob Isbell, and we've got this whole group that is basically taking the position that Joseph Smith had nothing to do with polygamy. It was completely a Brigham Young concept created by Brigham Young, and Joseph Smith, all he ever did was fight against it. And so I want to kind of go through with you and ask a number of different questions so we can get some clarity on this, because it seems to me that it's easy to make a point if you're willing to just say goodbye to any history. And if you're willing to say, well, even that history is not legitimate, it's made up or it's fake, well, then you can basically make up anything. And I don't think that's a fair thing for anybody to do, to take any historical records and just say, oh, because this person's not credible or this, whatever it is. I see those debates. And so hopefully we can create at least some clarity, and people can watch both videos and make their own decision based on this. So Jacob, let's jump right into it. And tell me a little bit about how you got involved in these kinds of discussions.
Actually, it's funny. It was actually through Ward Radio. As a lot of people know, I'm a pretty frequent guest on Ward Radio. Good friends with those guys. And they had interviewed Jacob Isbell when I was there, and so I kind of got to know Jacob Isbell a little bit. And that was where I kind of heard about this sort of polygamy denier group. And I was like, why would anyone think that? And so what I did is I really wanted to dig into understanding the topic in more detail, because I started hearing it more and more, people denying it, or they'd bring up something that I wasn't quite familiar with. I was like, oh, and that's what they'll do. They'll bring up facts that you don't know. And so you're kind of like, oh, wait, like maybe it's not what I thought. Like all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, did you know section 132 didn't become, made public until 1852? And it's like, oh, like I didn't know that. What else don't I know? And so it's a very similar tactic in some ways to what the, like flat earthers or people who say we didn't land on the moon, like they'll bring up something that you didn't know and you don't have an answer for. And then they're like, see, you can't answer this. Oh, but what I like to do with these sort of subjects is I lean into them. And this was kind of an ongoing discussion. So I started researching it in more detail. And I came across various people, Brian Hale's work, but one that was really useful to me was a debate that was done. I really like to watch debates, not just to participate in them, because I feel like it's a chance to see both sides engaging with each other. So you get to hear both sides instead of just hearing one side make their case, right? And so I watched a debate by Jacob Vidrine is his name, and I think it was Mark Tensmeyer is the other guy, against a couple of polygamy deniers. And Jacob Vidrine and Tensmeyer, like these guys are serious historians who know more about this subject than anyone I've ever met, with maybe the exception of like Brian Hales and a few others. And so when I watched their debate, I was blown away by the amount of evidence that exists that Joseph did indeed practice plural marriage. And so I began to kind of get a bigger picture of, okay, once you take into account all of the data, what's the best theory? And just as kind of the overarching way to approach a historical question is, and almost any question for that matter, is you have to look at all of the information, not just select information, get all the facts on the table. And then you have to come up with what is the theory that best accounts for the most data. Because in any historical account, you're going to have contradictions. You're going to have he said, she said. And so what you have to do is you have to figure out what best accounts for all the data. And what I found is that the polygamy deniers, what they do is they will only they'll only focus on some of the data, some of the historical information, while totally ignoring the stuff that goes against their case. And so the problem is that you get a very selective theory, a theory that they put out that only looks at some facts and just totally ignores others. And that's why I didn't find it very compelling. And so I started to become someone who is pretty vocal in defending the proposition that Joseph did indeed practice plural marriage. And then eventually it emerged into, hey, why don't we do a debate? And anyway, it kind of went from there until Jacob Isbell and I ended up setting a date to actually have the debate.
Fantastic. So Trevor, let's jump into the questions that you have, and let's just fire away and we'll just kind of see where it goes. You're on mute.
We mined these from different comments on some of the videos that we did with Michelle and Jacob, and then also a lot of them from the Ward Radio one, and then a few of them from the recent video that we did with Brian Stutzman. In the video with Brian Stutzman, he said something that was really intriguing, and it was one of the first times I've heard this, and I've gone in and done some other Googling, and I've seen Brian Hales and different guys kind of mention this, not in the same way that Stutzman did, but he said that he believed that Brigham Young was practicing a different form of polygamy than Joseph Smith was. He said he likened it to dynastic sealings, was the exact words. And that's, those sealings, dynastic sealings, spiritual wives, and not in the physical sense. And to us, that was a little new. I hadn't heard that from that position. I was curious, what are you seeing? What are your beliefs on that? Brigham's polygamy compared to what Joseph was actually practicing?
So first of all, I'll preface this for everybody that I consider myself, I'm not a trained historian. I don't even consider myself like a deep scholar on these subjects, but I will say that I'm more of a communicator of what the scholars have said, and I'm aware of what the scholars are saying on this subject. So I'll give my best answer to that. So there's no doubt that Joseph Smith had sealings that were for eternity only, meaning that they were not true sort of polygamous marriages. For instance, everybody likes to bring up the case of Helen Mar Kimball, who was 14 at the time that I say she was sealed to the prophet Joseph. Okay. There's no evidence anywhere that that was ever a sexual union of any kind. All right. So that's one that people bring up. So he married this girl where really, if you want to be more specific, what the historical record indicates is that he was sealed to her. Now, we know for a fact that there were other relationships that Joseph Smith had that were not sexual in nature. We know that. So there becomes a question about the sexual nature of Joseph's polygamy. Okay. Now, I believe that if you talk about Brigham Young's polygamy, okay, if we're talking about Brigham Young's polygamy in Utah, yes, it's definitely a more developed or different sort of thing than what is happening initially, because Joseph, I am a subscriber to what I call, or what is called, the reluctant polygamist theory. Okay. The idea is that Joseph did not want to do this. Always he said that he was commanded to do it by an angel, that he was threatened if he did not. And I genuinely think that the historical data best indicates, if you just look at the historical record, that Joseph Smith was terrified about what this was going to mean for his relationship with Emma, because his relationship with Emma was actually incredibly good. Okay. He and Emma, I think all of the indications didn't just have if you're dealing with the mid 1800s marriages, sometimes they're more or less romantic than others, but they had a genuine love for one another, like a romantic marriage. And I think he was absolutely terrified. And the Lord was like, no, like, I believe Joseph. I believe that an angel came and commanded him that you need to restore this practice. And so he was trying to figure out any way he could to get around it. Now, one way is to seal himself to people for eternity only. But I don't believe that those were the only kind of marriages he had. I believe that there is testimony from the women that were involved, that there were some of them who said that they did indeed have sexual relations with Joseph Smith. Now, one other thing, if we continue to go, is, but Joseph didn't have any children with any of these other women.
And that's the argument on the other side that I've heard.
Yes. Now, does that mean that he never had any sexual relations with any of these women? It doesn't. Okay. It's perfectly possible that a person can have sexual relations with other women and they don't get pregnant. However, what it does indicate in my mind is that this was not some wild sexual thing that he was out there just like having sex with all these women. Okay. And just the sheer number of them is hard to look at in the sense that this is some sort of a sexual thing. Right. So here's a real problem with the entire polygamy debate. If you go and study it and start to look into the sources, what you'll find is that we have very, very little pre-1844 records of polygamy. Okay. Like, it's everything that people said about it. It's a giant gossip mill that lasted for, to this day even, but really from 1844 until 1920, until the last person who knew Joseph Smith died. Like, there was a constant conversation about what this was. There was differing opinions and accounts. And so you have to be very careful when you investigate this to say that you know what was going on for sure. I personally, my model is that Joseph Smith implemented polygamy, but he was terrified to do it. He did it in as limited a way as he could, in a way as much as he possibly could, not to offend Emma. He got others involved into it, okay? And they were less reticent maybe, or more, I think they all were reticent initially, but they eventually were like, you know what? Nope, this is plural marriage. It's endorsed by God. And then when Joseph was killed, they just continued the practice into kind of a more standard thing, where Joseph was much more afraid of getting overly involved in it. So, and in the case of dynastic sealings, Joseph Smith was extremely close with the Kimball family. And so it's perfectly plausible that the Kimball family felt that they wanted to connect their family in eternity to Joseph's family. And they thought that they could do that by sealing their daughter to Joseph. So
Question.
a lot about that topic. Go ahead.
Why do you think that Joseph would have been or was afraid. If this is a commandment of the Lord, and I can understand his relationship with Emma, but when I think as Latter-day Saints today, maybe some of us, I'm not sure what the whole church is like, but for me, if something comes from the Lord, I am more than glad to obey it and follow it. And yes, I understand this is a complicated subject, yet Joseph was the closest to the Lord. Why do you think he would have been afraid to follow something like this?
Because I would be terrified even if God himself came and told me that I needed to tell my wife who I love that I need to go and marry other women. I think it genuinely just comes back down to that. I mean, you're still a human being. I think the reason he did it is because he did have faith in the Lord. I do believe that. Like I tell people this, when it comes to Joseph Smith polygamy, like I believe Joseph. Like I believe when he said that there was an angel. The thing is all the people who said what Joseph told them about polygamy and why he should do it, there's a remarkably consistent story that emerges. Okay. If you have a conspiracy, getting everyone to get their stories straight is actually very, very difficult. And so it's one of the reasons that I believe that these are reliable accounts of what Joseph had told people when he approached them about plural marriage. And it was, this is a commandment. And I think it was very early on even that this commandment was made. I don't have the exact year, but yeah, I think he was just terrified because of the implications of what it meant for his relationship with Emma. And frankly, he was right. Emma was not a big fan. It indicates that maybe for a time she was okay with it, and then she reneged on it, and their marriage was in peril. And I think that Joseph, and it was illegal. The saints are already being persecuted, and now you have this thing that could result in utter devastation to them, persecution not only by the mobs but by the federal government and the state governments themselves. Like I'm frankly, I'm shocked he did it. It's so crazy. Like I can see why it would have taken an angel with a sword to threaten him. So that's my take on it. I think just because the Lord commanded doesn't mean you're not going to be terrified to comply with what the Lord has commanded.
Okay, I got a couple follow-up questions. You mentioned that there are accounts of some of these wives that are detailing that they had sexual relations. Does this come outside of the affidavits from the temple lot? Are there other firsthand accounts of that besides the temple lot?
I'm only aware of the ones from the temple lot case, but that doesn't bug me because
Why not? It kind of bugs me because it could be manipulated, right? I'm not saying that it is, but it definitely could be.
It can be construed that way. But here's the thing. When you're asking someone about their sexual past and asking them to talk publicly about it, people aren't just going to go out and be like, yeah, this and that and the other. It's not
Don't kiss
going
and
to.
tell.
What was that? Yeah.
The counter
Don't kiss and tell.
the counter argument is a really solid one. It's the fact that, like, listen, their ability to practice Deseret and to be free where they thought they were free was getting invaded by the federal government, and they were coming in to usurp and to disincorporate and seize all the assets and all of this. And so to me, I'd say anything. Yeah, put a affidavit in front of me. Oh yeah, I was his boyfriend, whatever. Like,
Well,
I'm
it
doing
wasn't
that for the
at the
church.
time of the temple lot trial. This was, I don't know that stuff had heated up to that extent by the time of the temple lot trial. When, I can't remember the exact date of that trial. Do you want to look that up real quick?
It was 1893. The Temple Lot trial, officially known as the Reorganized Churches versus the Church of Jesus Christ, took place several weeks, 1893.
Well, if anything, the way I see it is that the women at that time would have wanted to downplay the polygamy side, but the sexual aspect of polygamy was a done deal at that time. The entire debate in that court case was about the temple lot and who was the legitimate sort of heir to get that land. So I don't see that it was so much a fear of the federal government, because if anything, they wanted to downplay stuff so the federal government wouldn't come after them. If you go out and say, yeah, we've been polygamous since the beginning, that's not going to help your case with the feds that are coming and breathing down your neck for polygamy. On the other hand, this church did have an incentive to try and get that land. here's the problem is, and some of these are, you can say, well, maybe it's not that strong of an argument because maybe they had a reason to lie. But the problem is you have so many other people who didn't, like Sidney Rigdon, Oliver Cowdery, I have a bunch of them in here that never were Brighamites. Austin Cowles. You have Leonard Sobey, who was, these are not Brighamites. These guys were not fans of Brigham Young in any way. And
Right.
so why would they lie about Joseph's polygamy? Right? At the end of the day, some of these arguments that they bring up get outside of the primary sort of thing. And that is that they want to say, well, we'll explain this, or maybe this happened. But I have to say, well, I know for a fact that these people said Joseph practiced polygamy, and you have not provided any plausible explanation for why those people said that he practiced it. Literally, essentially everyone in his inner circle agreed. The only person in his inner circle that disagreed was Emma. Like, I don't know. I mean, can you guys think of anyone else in the deep inner circle that said that he didn't practice polygamy?
Well, and
Besides
that's actually where I want to go with you is I've been doing a lot of research on Oliver Cowdery lately. Like, I love Oliver Cowdery, and
I do
I'm
too.
trying to show that, hey guys, Oliver Cowdery, when he did come back, and I hope that there are people that are watching this that are going to come back to the church. And Oliver Cowdery, when he chose to come back, he came back to a place you would have thought he would have gone with the Whitmers. You would have thought he would have gone with Emma, but he went to the same guys that excommunicated him. Now, my belief is he had some kind of revelation where the Lord told him, go be with the body of the church, because that's where the truth is. That's my personal opinion. I don't have anything to back that up. That's just my gut telling me. But I want to go back into about like 1833, 1832.
Mm-hmm.
Joseph and Oliver are tight. Like, I feel like Oliver was a great like Robin to Joseph's Batman. I just felt like they were a great team. They were experiencing some of the most incredible things. And
Definitely
I
a
don't know
dynamic
how
duo.
true this is, and I'm wondering if you know the truth behind this, but apparently something happens with Fanny Alger. Not sure how you say her last. We'll call her Fanny.
I think there's some debate over that pronunciation on both sides.
Yes,
So you say
and I
it
don't
either
want to
way.
get blown up here, so I'm saying it both ways. So something happens. Oliver, in his own hand, writes down that something went on with the two of them, and he called it a dirty, filthy scrape or affair, depending on who you listen to. Do you have any insights? And part of the timing that I think is interesting is it's like, okay, that happens supposedly around that time, whether it's 1832, 1833, 1834, I don't know, but something happens. And then you get the 1835 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants, and you get section 101, which people will bring up as an argument against, where it's like, polygamy is it's one man, one wife. Like, you get that argument of the 1835 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants. And I know Oliver Cowdery played the primary role in the 1835 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants. I think it was overseen by Joseph Smith. You have more information on that, but I'm just wondering, what precipitated all of that? And do you think polygamy because it doesn't appear that Oliver Cowdery was really for the idea of polygamy.
No.
It appears that he was against it. And that may have been part of the reason why he was out of the church by 1838. I'm just trying to understand the timeline of things. And how does a guy like Oliver Cowdery, who has the experiences that he's had in the early days of the church and the 1836 experience at Kirtland, end up being on the outs just 2 years after the Kirtland experience? But I love the idea of when he comes back in 1848. But if you could talk on that a little bit.
Yeah. So this is one of those ones that I want to ask again, there's a ton of gossip when you go kind of post Joseph's lifetime. But when you come back into Joseph's lifetime, there's an undeniable fact is that something happened with Joseph and Fanny. Something. So what was it? And why do you have all these people? And then you have things that happen, like the excommunication of Oliver Cowdery. And part of the reason for his excommunication was that he insinuated that the prophet had committed adultery. So it's like, maybe that's what that Fanny Alger thing was about. Again, you're just like, they have no explanation for this. They don't, again, this is what I tried to point out in the debate is like, you guys don't play defense. Don't have them ask you all the questions and then you try and come up with the answers for things that maybe, oh, well, maybe I could see where you're coming from. Where it's like, no, you have to answer this because you have to explain Oliver's behavior here. Oliver says what he says. He gets excommunicated and then he comes back to the Brighamite church. Huh? Like they have no theory to account for that kind of stuff. So, but you have to also remember, what do we actually have in this stuff? We have the letter from Oliver where to his brother that talks about the filthy, nasty scraper affair. We have the minutes of the excommunication where it talks about him being accused of being excommunicated for insinuating the prophet had committed adultery. I mean, we have enough, and then we have other people later who give the full story that correspond, that corroborate with those things that we have in the historical record. So what appears to be is it appears to be that something happened with Fanny and that something was some form of a plural marriage. We don't know exactly what happened. Like people talk about the barn thing. That's actually that is a really bad source. You're dealing with William Law, who said he wanted to kill Joseph Smith, who was, and this is far later, he's recounting this stuff. And then people just take it as fact. It's like believing, it'd be the equivalent of like, and I'll flip this around on its head, but it's like believing a biography on Donald Trump written by Nancy Pelosi or a biography on Nancy Pelosi written by Donald Trump, right? Like,
Right.
you guys, these people hate each other. You can't just take them at their word on what they said. Okay, so something happened. We know that Fanny was kicked out of their house.
Right. It's clear that Emma was not wanting her around. So, like, I'm just looking at Oliver Cowdery, and I view Oliver Cowdery as the most credible, one of the most credible people in all of church history.
Agreed.
Like I think he's a stand-up guy. I think he has his own beliefs. I think he can be like, very determined in what he believes.
I
things
do
need to
have
be,
a
and I
point I could make about this that I feel like I should at least present, and I'm going to compare it to today. And I don't like this term. So those that have left the church, I'll say it that way, is that they have a lot of different reasons that they have left the church. And what human nature is we've tried to find anything to justify our decision and actions. And I wonder if this dude, what's his name again, that is not very reliable and said he was going to kill the
William
prophet.
Law.
Yeah, so Mr. Law here, I wonder if he was trying to anchor himself into something that he could justify leaving the church or restore church. And see, like Latter-day Saints that leave the church, there's those that leave it because, of a misunderstanding. A lot of them, I'd say, are that. And then others that maybe have had a personal experience it may be legitimate, that there may be some weight to actually existing. And so it makes me think of Mr. Law. I can't justify someone claiming that he's going to kill or declaring that he's going to kill the prophet. Though I wonder, I just don't know the timeline of when he said that and when he said this thing, recounts this thing. But still, the point is maybe he's anchoring himself in something that might have been legitimate. What's your thoughts?
So let's talk for a moment about William Law. It's a very interesting kind of story there because people will bring up the fact that I use Law as a witness, basically that he had found out about polygamy and then he went to the Nauvoo Expositor to kind of expose it. And he was one of the people with the Nauvoo Expositor who exposed it. So why people be like, well, why are you trusting William Law? I don't trust William Law, but there's an objective fact. And that is the fact that William Law, Jane Law, and Austin Cowles in the Nauvoo Expositor wanted to expose polygamy, and they quote section 132. Here's another thing that you just have, this whole polygamy discussion, debate, it's an endless rabbit hole. So I like to tell people, here's how you clear it up and you get to the heart of the issue real fast. If Joseph Smith is the author of section 132, then he taught and practiced polygamy. If he is not, then he's not. Okay? It's that simple. And it's very, very simple. The historical record is 100% clear. Just because the revelation became officially public in 1852 doesn't mean that that's the first time it ever shows up in the historical record. It shows up in 1844 in the affidavits of William Law, Jane Law, and Austin Cowles. Okay? That's just, I'm sorry, anyone who denies that, you're out of your mind. Even Jacob Isbell in the debate.
So DNC 132 shows up in the affidavit, like in its full form, like in all
but
verses,
all of the key elements, including like specific verbiage. If you guys want, we can go here to, let me pull up the slides here. I have let me pull these up real fast and share them on the screen. But we can actually look at, hold on one moment.
Here's the one thing that gives me heartburn on 132 is that Isaac's name, and maybe you can help me clear this up in my own head. It's that Isaac gets mentioned as somebody who was a practicer of polygamy. And I don't know if they just use the term Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as just that group of people, because I can't find anything in the Bible that would say that Isaac practiced polygamy. It's
and I don't
necessarily
have an answer to that.
Okay.
I'm not overly bothered by it. I mean, there's a potential that maybe he did practice plural marriage and we just don't have that in the Bible, in the biblical record. And then it also could be that it was an error that was made in a revelation that was given. I don't hold that any revelation is infallible in any way. So it's not a big deal for me.
That is the best answer I've ever received from somebody. So thank you for just being
legendary,
honest, like
legendary.
Yeah.
Well,
that was awesome.
So when we look at the, but this is what's obvious. You have to ask the question, is there any evidence that Jane Law, Austin Cowles, and William Law saw the revelation that we now call section 132? Is there any evidence of that? Well, when you look at what they say, like Jane Law literally says that the revelation, quote, it authorized some to have the number of 10 wives. Section 132 literally uses the term 10 virgins. It gives that specific number. Austin Cowles said that the revelation talked that David and Solomon had many wives. That's exactly what section 132 has. He says that he even mentions that they sinned not save in the matter of Uriah. He said that that was part of the revelation. And literally that's what section 132 says. Okay. It said that the talking of sealing people up to eternal life against all sins. That's exactly what section 132 talks about. I mean, you couldn't have someone give you all these details and be like, oh no, they never saw it. Like, they did see it. And it goes on. William Law, I mean, anyway, you can look over all these. I don't want to go through every one of them in detail, but he says, it talks about marrying virgins, and it very much virgins is a term that's used in it. So they're using the very specific language of section 132. And here's the thing. There's a plausible reason why. And that is, I'm going to stop sharing here, is that in 1843, August, there was, all right, so let me go through the timeline real quick of section 132, okay? We know for a fact that Joseph Smith received a revelation in July of 1843. That is not in dispute, okay? It's in his journal, okay? Also, we have others who wrote in their journals that, and I guess I might want to pull back up the slides maybe on this because I have the slides that actually show these journal entries. All right. So if I come back up here in the slideshow, it's up here near the top. What we have here is, keep going up. Sorry, there's a lot to this. All right. So we have Joseph Smith's own journal, which says that he received a revelation in the office and presence of Hiram and William Clayton on the date of July 12th, 1843. Okay. So there's a question that I like to ask. And that is, I like to ask the question, what was that revelation? Okay, but there's another journal entry that supports this same thing and gets a little bit more detail. Okay, so let me share this one.
What does the other side say that this is?
They don't have an answer.
Okay.
They say it was some sort of a revelation on marriage, but it wasn't section 132. Okay, so as we look at this, we then have William Clayton, who wrote in his journal on July 12th, 1843, this morning I wrote a revelation consisting of 10 pages on the order of the priesthood, showing the designs in Moses, Abraham, and Solomon on having many wives and concubines. What? Okay. Again, what they say that this means is, again, they actually claim that William Clayton's journal can't be relied on in any way. They say that there's a total later forgery, and there's a whole debate about that. But again, it's not just his journal. So we have to continue to go on. This is the biggest one for me. Okay. So we know that there was a revelation given on July 12th. No one should dispute that. Well, the next month in August of 1843, you then have a high council meeting that is given in Nauvoo. Okay. Now, if Joseph had just received a revelation the prior month, maybe in this meeting they'd talk about it, just maybe. And guess what? That's exactly what happens. And how do we know that they talk about section 132 in there? Well, because that's what everyone who is in that meeting said. Okay. No one that was present at that meeting. I just asked people, one of my favorite things to do with the polygamy deniers, I just asked them, what was the subject of the August 12th, 1843 High Council meeting in Nauvoo? And they can say whatever they want, but they can't deny what the historical record says. So let me show real quick some of the evidence here of this. Okay. So we have here, first and foremost, a contemporaneous journal entry from Franklin D. Richards, where he says that in that meeting, Hiram was before the High Council, and he said that a man shall take up his brother's wife and raise up seed unto him, as it was in Israel, must be again established, as in Deuteronomy.
Which is Levirate marriage, right?
Levirate marriage, exactly, which is a form of plural marriage. So we have evidence right here. They're talking about Levirate marriage in this. Well, okay, we can go on. The next thing I want to show is this thing by Leonard Sobey. This one I think is absolutely devastating. Okay. Leonard Sobey was in that meeting. Okay. Leonard Sobey never went with Brigham. He was not a Brighamite. And there was an apostle by the name of Zenas Gurley in the RLDS church. And in the late 1870s, they were trying to figure out, like, okay, did this polygamy thing really happen? There was kind of, the RLDS church was like, no, it didn't. Well, Zenas Gurley knew that Leonard Sobey had been in that meeting. And so he went, all right, I'm going to go talk to Leonard Sobey and I'm going to get the truth. And here's the full statement on here, but I'll read the quote part of it. And he gave a notarized statement to Zenas Gurley on this subject. He said, on or about the 12th day of August, 1843, Elder Hiram Smith read the revelation on celestial marriage. That revelation did not originate with Brigham Young, but was received by the prophet Joseph Smith and read in the High Council by his authority. Okay.
Wow.
So
that's pretty.
That's straight up. That's just the guy here's what the guy who was there, who did not like Brigham Young, said happened. Okay. Another one of my favorite ones.
Now, I didn't hear you bring that one up in the debate. Did you bring that up in the debate and I just missed it?
I think I did bring that one up in the debate.
Okay.
I think I did.
I must have just missed it.
Here's another fun one. Ebenezer Robinson. Okay. So Ebenezer Robinson, not a Brighamite, not a follower of Brigham, none of that stuff. RLDS guy. Okay. He wrote a letter to Joseph Smith III, who was the head of the church. Remember, the late 18, this is in the era where it was the big debate was going on. We have to remember this, Joseph didn't practice polygamy debate. This already happened. Okay. It happened in the late 1800s, like 1870s to 1890s. And Joseph Smith III
So the RLDS was contending, making the claim that he did not practice polygamy. Is that what was going on?
The RLDS Church are the OG polygamy deniers. Okay.
Okay.
They're the
Okay.
original guys who were like, polygamy never happened. Okay. Led by Joseph Smith III. Okay. He's like, my dad never practiced polygamy. Well, guess what? Joseph Smith III wasn't there, but Leonard Sobey was, and so was Ebenezer Robinson. He said, and here's what he said to him. He said, he was talking to Joseph Smith III about his uncle. He said, Hiram Smith taught me the doctrine. Having a perfect personal knowledge of these facts, together with many others not here stated, a denial of them, meaning a denial of polygamy, sounds like to me like a great lie. I'm sorry it is so, but we cannot undo the past. Okay? Just so everyone knows, the RLDS Church gave up on this position. The OG polygamy deniers eventually came around to say, yeah, he practiced plural marriage, because there was just so much evidence of people that were there that said that he did, that have no business. Again, I go back to them and I say, explain this to me. Why did he say this? Why did Leonard Sobey say what he said? Why is section 132 mentioned in the Nauvoo Expositor in such detail? Like, why are there contemporaneous journal entries about this? Like, they can't, like, they'll bring up, well, you know, those women in the trial, they had reason to lie, right? Well,
Yeah.
all right. That's pretty weak compared to the testimony of the people that were there and contemporaneously made records about it. And what Oliver Cowdery said, Sidney Rigdon said that he warned Joseph Smith about this, said it was going to bring the rule in the church, but he did it anyway. It's like, why? Why is literally every person in Joseph's inner circle in agreement except for Emma? And with Emma, I'll tell you why. Emma had just lost her husband because of this. Okay? So she's she never was okay with it. Not only that, she's now in a property dispute with Brigham Young over properties belonging to the church or belonging to her family, and she wants to retain them to support her children. God bless her soul. I don't have any bones to pick with Emma. Okay? But when you
this
say
elect
who
lady
has
is
a motive,
pissed.
what was that?
I said, yeah, this elect lady is pissed.
Yes. And frankly, I get it. I mean, that poor woman had been through the freaking ringer, and then
Been through
she ends
it.
up,
Totally.
and she's in a rough spot now with Brigham Young and her over the properties that belong to the church because it's not all neatly delineated. Okay? So, okay, people are just like, well, you can't say Emma would ever lie. It's like, no, I can, because if it's either her or it's literally everybody else. Okay? And Joseph Smith's denials, for instance, that they bring up, first of all, they aren't as strong as I think they say when you actually look at all of them. What Joseph said, not Hiram. I think Hiram went a little out there and was kind of like willing to say things that they weren't as carefully worded, some of his denials. But
Can
they had a good
I ask a
reason.
question? Can I ask a question
Yeah.
about the Hiram one? Okay.
Yeah.
So, couple of things that I should bring up. Otherwise, people in the comments are going to say, you didn't ask him the hard questions. So I've heard this high council thing brought up before.
Okay.
And the comments that I saw people mentioning was who specifically, because you mentioned there were several people that gave account of this high council meeting. Who specifically, where can we go in and research who said what?
Okay.
That's my first part of the question.
So let's go to, I'm going to pull this up on my end here. I want to pull up the list of the people who were in that meeting. Okay.
So in the meeting or gave a statement of what they heard?
Both. So I want to look at, because you can judge people by the statements that they made, but you can also judge people by their behavior of what they did. Because basically everyone in that meeting ended up becoming polygamists. And following Brigham Young, with the exception of the three who left. Now I I'm trying to
I mean,
pull up
wouldn't that kind of corroborate? They're like, yeah, of course they were. They got on the same page and they said this is what was said. I
Yep.
mean,
Let me pull this up real quick.
okay. And
So
while you're pulling
here's
that up,
the
okay,
oh,
you got it.
I got it right here. I found it.
Okay.
Okay. So who in this list eventually practiced polygamy? Well, essentially all of them. In other words, they accepted the revelation. Now, the ones who so all of those people right there, they all are, none of them ever denied that it was read in the meeting. They didn't respond back and say that this wasn't read. They all were, because they all are followers of Brigham Young and they all are practicing polygamy. It's sort of like these people accept 132. Like, I'm not, just because I don't need a statement from every one of them to know that they were in agreement with what Brigham and what everyone was saying about section 132 and where it came from. Okay. Because they all practice polygamy. So the ones you really have to account for are the ones who didn't, right? That's what in the 1880s, when the RLDS church wanted to find out the truth, remember, they weren't going to go to these guys because these guys are all Brighamites who are practicing polygamy. So you didn't have to get statements from them. They wanted to get statements from the people who weren't. Now, Austin Cowles and William Marks, so we can talk about what did each one of these people say. Now, William Marks did not leave a statement. Austin Cowles obviously did because he put it in the Nauvoo Expositor, and not only that, he revealed the specific text of it.
Doesn't William Marks have some supposed statement that's not good, helpful for, I don't think, either side, where he said Joseph came to him like 3 weeks before he was martyred and
no,
told
it's
him
great
that
for our
he had
side.
made a mistake or something like that?
It's great
Was that
for
William
our
Marks?
side. Yeah, and I'll talk about William Marks here in a minute. First of all, I
Okay.
want to point out, though, that the people who left statements, so we're really looking at these three. These are the big ones, right? So the question is, Leonard Sobey, okay, he left his record, obviously said, look, 132 is what it is, okay? Austin Cowles obviously said 132 was revealed, and he talked all about it in the Nauvoo Expositor. The next one is William Marks, okay? Now, William Marks became part of the RLDS Church, and he had a very interesting story about polygamy. He basically said, what William Marks did was he said that polygamy, that Joseph did implement polygamy, but that he regretted it, right? And so right before he died, he regretted it. And then, so now I'm going to be with the RLDS Church because Joseph regretted polygamy. And so the true path is really not to be polygamous. It was just a mistake that happened for a little while. Okay. I don't know about you guys, but that's not good. Also, William Marks could have at any moment said that that was never read in the meeting, but he never did. Why didn't he? He didn't, because he knew that everyone else knew that it was read in that meeting. And he knew that he'd have a bunch of people saying, what are you talking about? Okay. So when you take into account all of this data, you end up in a situation where the historical record very clearly leans in one direction. So, yeah, can you come up with some mental gymnastics to say that, well, these guys were all lying, and Leonard Sobey, Brigham Young, he met with him a few weeks before and he paid him $1 million so that way he would make that fake affidavit, and yeah, I mean, you can come up with whatever wild conspiracy you want, but when you actually look at the data, that's
I've
just
got
what
I got another, sorry to cut you off. I got another Hiram quote. Okay. So this is in April of 1844. And in this firsthand account of Hiram, and he was talking about his wife who had passed away, and when Joseph had revealed sealings and sealings by proxy, that Hiram was confused in the teaching, and Joseph had told him that Hiram could marry his current wife via proxy and be sealed to his first wife, which is what was the wish of his heart. And Hiram was confused, and he thought that he meant that he would be sealed to both of them. And Joseph clarified, no, it's through proxy. And he had to reteach to him, what proxy was and how performing it would be sealed to his original wife. And in this same diary, I believe it's diary, Hiram goes in and gives an explanation of something that was done in April of 1844. And he says, I speak to the elders is in consequence of the 10,000 reports from abroad. Almost every man runs to him to inquire if things are true, how many spiritual wives a man may have. I know nothing about it. It was he might call wife, should I not know anything about it? In about half an hour after man was gone, and this is all transcribed, so they're kind of going through it. The elders tell such things all over the country. I am authorized to tell you from henceforth that any man who comes in and tells you such a fool doctrine to come in and take away his license. And back then the priesthood, instead of having a temple recommend, they had a license for the priesthood. So this is in August, supposedly the same time frame that he's speaking to the High Council.
You said April
Did you say
1844?
April?
I'm not familiar with this.
Yeah, sorry, April. I apologize. April 1844. And so it's just like, man, these guys are talking out of both sides of their mouth here.
Yeah. So I want to propose to you a situation that can be kind of challenging in Joseph's mind. Okay, so you're Joseph Smith, and you've been commanded by the Lord to implement plural marriage, but it has to be controlled entirely by you. Okay. Now,
Which is just so you know, in this book, Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith, what you just said is actually 100% fact. I mean, I don't know why nobody brings this up. I just grabbed this book to look at it, and it says, in the afternoon, rode to the prairie to show some, this is on page 323, some of the brethren some land, evening at home, and walked up and down the streets with my scribe, gave instructions to try those persons who were preaching, teaching, and practicing the doctrine of plurality of wives. For according to the law, I, this is Joseph Smith speaking, hold the keys of this power in the last days.
but I will
For
say
there
that
is-
what is in that Teachings of the Prophet, what you're reading right now is actually an expansion on what was in an original journal entry by Joseph Smith that was far smaller.
He's saying that he holds the keys to this very thing.
Well, that, and I'll say, but if you want to read the original journal entry, and this is something that they bring up, the original journal entry of Joseph Smith didn't say all of that. But what they did was that they expanded the journal entry and Joseph didn't make that journal entry, just so you know. His scribe did, and his scribe went.
Okay.
There's a couple points to hit on here. There's two separate ones. So let me first hit on the one that you're talking about, Shane, and then we'll go over here to Trevor.
Okay.
So Shane, your point is, I'll bring up the original journal entry because they like to bring this up. They say, look, Joseph modified the journal, or not, Brigham modified Joseph's journal. Okay, that they altered the historical record. Okay,
Man, that gets so scary when because then how does anybody know what's true if you're going to take the position that it's been altered, it's been changed?
Well, that's the thing. They say it's been changed, but it hasn't. The original still exists. It's in the Joseph Smith papers. Let me pull it up here on the screen real quick. So if you actually look here at the original journal entry by Joseph Smith, oops, let me share my screen. Okay, here it is. I just want you to look at the actual visual copy of it. So you can see in the Joseph Smith papers, you can see what was written there. Remember, this is Joseph Smith's journal. Joseph didn't write this, just so everybody knows. This was written, I believe, by William Clayton, I think, or no, it was Willard Richards. Willard Richards wrote this journal entry for Joseph, okay? And it said, this is what it actually said, the original thing, okay? It said, evening at home, walked up and down the street with a scribe and gave instruction to try those who were preaching or teaching the doctrine of plurality of wives. Okay. Then it says, on this law, Joseph forbids it and the practice thereof. No man shall have but one wife. Now, obviously, what you were just reading, the teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith, is quite expanded. Well, guess what? The person who wrote this, Willard Richards, and the others that were around knew what Willard is writing something coded here. He's saying he's against the plurality of wives. On this law, Joseph forbids it. Okay. Well, it's kind of a weird thing to say, right? This is sort of an ambiguous journal entry. What the heck does that mean? On this law, Joseph forbids it. That implies that there's some other law maybe under which it's not forbidden. Well, what you're reading in the teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith is the explanation of the teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith based on what was written down originally, right? So these are the testimonies of what Joseph taught by the people who were there and that knew him and what this actually meant. Okay, so no, they did not alter the original. They just merely gave their interpretation as to what Joseph was teaching in relation to this journal entry. Okay,
Who's in there doing this interpretation?
So Willard Richards, I believe Willard was involved in the compilation of the history. So Joseph Smith himself was involved in the, let me stop sharing here. Joseph Smith himself was involved in going through and revising his own history of the church. Now, people hear the word revise and they think like some nefarious thing happened. It isn't nefarious. If you're going to write a history, you're going to go through several drafts. And so you're going to have to revise the drafts of your official history, okay, to make sure you have all the things straight or even punctuation or whatever it is. Well, Joseph, what Brigham Young and them did after he died was they continued the project that Joseph had started. Joseph, I think, had gotten to a year like 1837 or something in his sort of official history of the church, okay? They then wanted to continue the project, and they continued to create drafts and revise them and all of that. And so people will see a thing where he's like, Brigham Young said that he revised the history. You guys, he's just talking about going over the church history and revising the drafts of the history of the church. It's nothing nefarious. This is totally normal. Now, one of the things that they would do are things like this. You have a journal entry that was made by Willard Richards. Well, guess what? Willard Richards is there. You can ask Willard, hey, Willard, what is this about? Oh, well, Joseph was talking about this and it has to do with on this law. And so they write down an expanded interpretation of what this meant as part of the official history of the church and to explicate what Joseph Smith had taught them.
Based on context, based on that he was there, and
Based on the fact
he's not
that they-
trying to write. I mean, can you imagine these guys scribing? They're literally walking down the street. Joseph Smith's doing something, and some guy's standing there trying to write it. So
And
you're
you gotta
trying to use as short a hand as possible, because you just don't have, like, that'd be a hard thing.
And it's very obvious, and you can see it in their actual journals, that these guys would use coded language when talking about plural marriage. There are multiple places where you can find that they'll just put the initials of people's names instead of their full names. There's a bunch of this kind of stuff that's going on. So remember, these guys are, you can see in the actual forensic of it that these guys are using this sort of coded language. So we don't need to freak out if those things don't totally match. Now,
So
back to, anything else on
well,
that, Shane?
I just want to bring up one thing while we're kind of on the topic of church history, and really why this topic is relevant, because I saw something, and Trevor, maybe you can speak on this a little more because you were bringing it up to me. There's something floating around out there as to like the top reasons why people leave the church, and I think the top two are like, according to this, and I don't know if it's legit, church history. I don't know, Trevor, what is it?
Yeah, let me share it. This is kind of fun. Can you guys see my screen okay?
Oh yeah. This is a very
you-
famous survey that was done, I believe, by, I want to say
Uchtdorf.
Clayton Christensen was involved in this.
Yeah, this was 2013, and this was actually commissioned by Elder Uchtdorf, and he wanted to understand why people were leaving, and get as much info as he could. And this is over 3,000 people that were surveyed, and these guys at least had one calling or more in the church, and they went through and did like this comprehensive dig in. And this is Stacker up here. If any of you don't know him, he's a LDS guy he's hilarious, and he's out there. And in fact, Jacob, I know you and him go back and forth all the time. It's one of my favorite things, seeing you and him Twitter battle.
Stacker's an interesting character for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. But the point is that if you click on this thing and zoom in, the number one thing is I ceased to believe the doctrine and theology. I studied church history and lost my belief. And then when you dig into it, the two categories in that is polygamy and the Book of Abraham. And so, this is a big subject, and one of the questions that somebody put in the forums is, do you guys think that the church is aware of what's happening right now, especially with like Michelle Stone? You know, when we're making our YouTube channel and we're being like, cool, we got 3,000 followers or 2,500 followers, and we look who's got a lot. Word Radio, I mean, they only have 38,000. Michelle Stone has 100,000. So there's a lot of people that are waking up to this, and the question is, do you think the church is keenly aware of this pain point right now?
So
Stop sharing your screen.
Michelle Stone's subscriber count is really unusual. Just so you all know, if you look at her videos, she'll have videos that are getting like 1,000 views, even though she has 100,000 subscribers. It's really odd, and there's been a big debate over what's going on there. I'm not implying that she has done anything shady, but it's really unusual when, I mean, I'm getting 3 or 4 times as many views each month as someone who has 10 times as many subscribers as me. So just now, is the church aware of that? Sure. I think that, when you say the church, who do you mean? Somebody in the church office building? I'm sure. I know that the church is aware of content creators that are out there. I know that because I know that the church has a sort of, a wing within the church office building of like church bureaucrats who are trying to compile information for the brethren about what is
we
the
call
talk
them the
about
analysts.
Yeah,
We know what
the
you're talking
analysts.
about.
the analysts, whatever they are, they're looking at that. And I've even I talked with one. I think I did. I know Cardin has talked with
Did
one.
he look like a Men in Black?
Kind of. Actually, they're a lot cooler than both of us expected. They're actually really pretty cool people and pretty down
Oh,
to earth.
these are buttoned up Mackenzie level studs, like studs, and it's one of the highest paying positions in the church.
Well, whatever's going on, they are aware of online content creators because they are aware of this because they want to know, and rightfully so, understand what are the things that are being said about the church that we need to address, that our members and that others are hearing and seeing about the church in the broader kind of public conversation that's going on. And obviously polygamy is one of them. Now, I don't want to ignore what you were saying though, Trevor, about Hiram Smith and some of the things that he had said. So first of all, I do think that you can make a case that Hiram was willing to essentially lie about polygamy. There is a question, but that's one possible theory. Okay. And frankly, people are like, well, how could Hiram Smith ever tell a lie? It's like, well, if the Jews are in your house and you're hiding them and the Nazis come and knock on your door and they're like, hey, you got any Jews in your house? And you're like, no. People were like, yeah, that was okay to lie to the Nazis.
This was an illegal practice. And so we know
people's lives were on the line here.
Yeah.
Okay.
We know that John Tate, like we know throughout the time that they practiced polygamy, they were doing things to not die. Like we know that.
So I don't have a big issue if they lied about it. Okay. It doesn't bother me that much, but I also want to be very careful to not run to that because there's another issue. And this is what I wanted to bring up. Okay. For you, Trevor. Okay. Was there unauthorized, let's just say in Brigham's, Utah, was there unauthorized plural marriage happening? There was. During Joseph's time, John C. Bennett and others absolutely took advantage of of plural marriage in order to basically just commit adultery. Okay? There's no doubt that that's happening. Now, I want to put you in a really tricky spot, the spot that Joseph Smith was in. Okay, I have to stop this unauthorized adultery that's going on under the guise of plural marriage, and I have to implement plural marriage, and I have to keep this all secret. Okay?
And I know my wife does not like this on top of all of that.
Yes. Okay, so what you have is a condemnation of unauthorized plural marriage. There's no doubt that that is what's going on. But, and the thing is, how do you differentiate? Like people will say, well, there's spiritual wifery and then there's celestial plural marriage, and that's how they distinguished it. I don't know that they had a good linguistic distinction. I think it was a big mess. And that Joseph Smith is trying to figure out, how the freak do I stop John C. Bennett and those type of people from committing adultery and taking advantage of this while still implementing what the Lord wants me to implement?
I call it
And oh, by the way, I'm going to run for
first.
president as well.
Yeah, I
amidst
call
all
it yeah, I call it the first Utah, or the first LDS MLM. What John C. Bennett was doing, he was going out there being like, seal yourself unto me. And the next guy's being like, no, I got a direct upline to Joseph Smith.
Absolutely. Now, here's what's really interesting. This is one of my favorite slides that I have here. I'm going to pull it up on the screen. Okay. So in 1842, a letter was given to the Relief Society. And it was basically, they were dealing with the John C. Bennett problem. Okay. Now it says, we don't want anybody to believe anything is coming for us contrary to the old established morals. In other words, I don't want you guys thinking that you can go and be married to a bunch of different people and somebody comes to you and is like, hey, we want to restore polygamy. Don't believe them. But then he puts this, unless it be by message delivered unto you by our own mouth, by actual revelation and commandment. What the freak is that doing in there?
Who's writing this?
This is Joseph Smith, and I believe it's the first presidency, writing to the Relief Society. Okay. You can see the original here, March 1831, 1842, or 1842, March 31st. Okay. And it says, all persons pretending to be authorized by us or having any permit or sanction from us will be liars, whether they are prophets, seers, revelators, patriarchs, on and on and on. And the devil, they're all culpable. What's really funny is there are two versions of this letter. Okay. There is the official version that the Relief Society ended up kind of like publishing, and then there is the original. Guess what? The original contains this unless clause. The later edition didn't. Why? Because it kind of looked bad. You don't want to have don't practice polygamy unless we say so if you're out there denying polygamy. Okay? But the original did. So what we have here, again, if we go through this, and Eliza R. Snow, she later explained what was going on. I didn't make up this sort of scenario where Joseph is trying to get his hands around this whole problem. Because remember, you have unauthorized polygamy, which is condemned. You have spiritual wife system, condemn it. And then there's, let's just call it celestial plural marriage. I don't know, but whatever it is, it later became known as celestial plural marriage. Later, they sort of came up with this distinction, but there was the need to create this distinction between unauthorized polygamy and authorized polygamy. And Eliza R. Snow, this is exactly what she said, what was going on. She said, when the Relief Society received a letter that basically condemned this stuff, she said this. She said, at the time, the Sisters of the Relief Society signed our article, basically their article condemning polygamy, I was married to the prophet. We made no allusion to any other system of marriage than Bennett's. His was prostitution, and he succeeded in pandering his course on the credulity of the unsuspecting, making them believe he was thus authorized by the prophet. So in other words, what you're dealing with here is the exact predicament that I said. Joseph Smith was trying to implement plural marriage while trying to condemn what Bennett was doing. Okay? And so when people, now I will say that in Hiram, he gets to where I'm like, I think this might just be straight up lying. I don't know if he's just condemning, like if he's carefully wording this very well, but
stratagem, we'll call it stratagem.
But Joseph, on the other hand, in researching for the debate, I found all the statements I could find on Joseph Smith, quote unquote, condemning polygamy. And I want to just kind of hit those real quick here.
Can I ask you a question about the Relief Society really quick? So in looking through one of the comments, I saw somebody mention that Brigham Young disbanded the Relief Society, and it was disbanded for 23 years, and it wasn't until 1867 that it was reinstated. And just a little interesting fact that I found out, I've always told people the Relief Society is the oldest continuous, women's organization in the entire world. And I went into ChatGPT and I asked them, like, is that true? And it said, actually, the YWCA holds the record. And it said, because Brigham Young disbanded the Relief Society and didn't reinstate it till 1867, they're 1855. And had we originally gone to the 18, prior to that, we would have had the record. So Brigham Young made it so the Relief Society is not the oldest organization.
The
But my
second
question
oldest.
is,
It still
it's
is.
now the
It
second
isn't
oldest.
oldest continuous.
Continuous, yes. But
You
yeah,
could make that
they took
case.
that title from it. So what happened? Because a lot of people are saying this was Brigham Young had to do this because the Relief Society was losing their mind over polygamy, and they had to be this huge patriarchal, down push.
Uh,
Have you heard talks about this?
I think that's a pretty wild theory. I think there are other reasons for. I could see why the Relief Society would have trouble with that. I could see how the Relief Society would be a place where women would get together and be like, "Hey, we don't like this." I'm not saying that plural
Right.
marriage is like easy on the saints. There's no doubt about it. But I think also there were probably loyalties to Emma, I would imagine. I don't know enough about that history though to be able to comment on it very well. I do know if you want to push the big like, oh, Brigham Young, he's a big patriarchal guy who just wants women barefoot and pregnant. If you actually study the history of Brigham Young with the women of the church, it's actually fascinating. He believed that women should get college educations. He sent his own daughter and others back east to study medicine. He was I could pull up the quotes, but Brigham Young, when it comes to women, is LDS women were far more empowered in the late 1800s in many ways than the women of others. He had women who divorced him,
So I
all
have
sorts of things.
two questions for you. Okay.
Mhm.
So I want to take it to the scriptures and then another direction. Um, Revelation 2:4. I don't know if you are well versed in the book of Revelation, but in this chapter, it's talking about, well, it's talking about um the different candlesticks and the angels for each of these churches. This
Mhm.
is a prophecy, or well, I mean, in Revelation, we know what Revelation is, but in verse 4, I think that it's talking about the restored church. And see, because there's 7 churches, they all uniquely fit the seven dispensations of time. And you have 7 angels that all lead these 7 churches. And this one in particular really sounds like the restored church. It seems like in Revelation, John is talking, starting with Joseph Smith's dispensation. So in verse 4, it says, "Nevertheless, I have somewhat against thee, because thou hast left thy first love." Now, if we read earlier and to get more context, verse 2, it says, "I know thy works and thy labor and thy patience, and how thou canst not bear them which are evil. And thou hast tried them which say they are apostles and are not, and hast found them liars." And so there's more that's actually shared, like in verse 6, it talks about how that thou hatest the deeds of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. And if we, look at the Nicolaitans, we understand that they were a sect, I guess, of Christians that, even had some sexual beliefs, and that it wasn't as critical, some of the commandments that were taught, and that they could have some behaviors that were sexual in nature. And so, I don't know if you think that this is talking about the seventh, Joseph's dispensation, and that this is related to Joseph, but this is just a scripture that I feel like really speaks about Joseph Smith. And I wonder what your thought is on verse 4 in particular about leaving his first love, potentially Emma.
I don't know that I associate that particular verse with Joseph Smith specifically. And I'm
Okay.
not, I wouldn't say that I have any strong feelings about the proper exegesis of those specific verses. I would
Okay.
say though that when I had my debate with Jacob Isbell, okay, one of the things is there's sort of 2 different questions here. One is a historical question. Okay. Did Joseph Smith practice plural marriage? Right. That's a historical question. And to answer a historical question, you look at the historical record and you do a historical analysis of what does the record show and what is most likely the case for what happened based on what the historical record indicates when you take into account all the data. Now, Jacob Isbell didn't really argue the history side of it. That wasn't what he did, which was odd to me because it was a debate about a historical question.
Yeah.
He wanted to make a scriptural case for that polygamy is immoral, therefore Joseph did not practice it. Okay. That was sort of the angle that he tried to go.
I think the reason why I bring this up is because I didn't care about this subject. I even shared this to Michelle Stone, is that for me, this is not a doctrine of salvation. And as far as I understood, it's not a doctrine of exaltation either.
Mhm.
That to have one wife in the eternities is just fine.
Yeah, agreed.
My angle in bringing this up is more the perspective of, okay, I think historically, yes, Joseph did have involvement with it, but was it a doctrine? And was it something that I guess it leads to my next question. I really am curious about your thoughts, or if you've found any history on this.
Yeah.
And
So
that is
as far as the doctrine of plural marriage, like, is it right to ever think that God
legit.
would ever command plural marriage? Yeah, I would say yes.
Okay.
Primarily because of, so one of the reasons and I'll tell everyone right now, I do not have anything for polygamy. I think that it's really rough on everyone involved, especially the women. I do not see it as an ideal. I do not believe that it is required for exaltation, as some
Okay, good. That was one of the questions I was going to ask you, because I feel the same way. I don't know if that was taught at some point, but I can tell you this right now. I got a wife and she is not, I don't want to practice polygamy. And she's like, you're not practicing polygamy. So I'm like, yeah, cool. We're on the
This
same,
is an
same page.
this is an optional doctrine, it sounds like. And it's a weird thing to be.
I'll explain, and I'll get into this sort of optional doctrine thing. Here is what, first of all, once you get married and you have a wife, you kind of realize that having more wives would actually be like really rough. And there's a reason that guys like to sleep with a lot of women, but not marry a lot of women. It's much easier route, just so y'all know. Here's the reality of it. There are doctrines, or we use the word doctrine. The gospel is based on certain principles, but principles can be applied differently in different contexts for different reasons. Okay.
At different times.
And at different times. Okay. We do not practice some of the laws that were in the Old Testament, obviously.
Sounds more like tools.
In certain ways, yes, I agree. I believe that they are tools to bring about the purposes of God. The principles are unchanging. Okay. I believe that the principles behind things, I think, are unchanging, but I do not believe that the application of principles are going to be the same in all contexts. Okay. Here's my personal take on polygamy. First of all, it obviously is something that was practiced in the Old Testament. The house of Israel is literally a polygamous household from 4 different women. God has utilized polygamy in the past for various purposes. Like it's beyond doubt in my mind that it's there. And if you're going to say, you're saying that the guy, if you're saying that polygamy is adultery, well, guess what? The guy who literally received the commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery, from the Lord, was married to more than one woman. He was married to the Midianite and then the Cushite woman later. Okay. Now there's some debate. People say, oh, well, the Midianite had died before that. There's no indication of that. You're just making that up. Okay. And the other issue.
Well, I think that the scripture that nobody's talking about in this debate is in Genesis 38. And it's the clearest to me that the Lord, Judah goes to his son Onan, tells Onan to take his dead brother's wife. So Mary, his brother had passed away. He's told to go marry her through a levirate type of situation. He doesn't do exactly as the Lord instructs. He spills a seed on the floor, and it says, and the Lord slew him. So he didn't do what he was commanded to do, and that was to take on another wife and raise up seed to his brother in a levirate fashion. You can make the argument that Jacob was duped into it. You can make the argument that Abraham listened to his wife. Like, I can see that. What you can't make an argument on is Genesis 38. And I'm not sure why nobody brings that one up, because that's, to me, really straightforward what the Lord was commanding in that instance.
Fair enough. And I would say that anytime somebody, if polygamy is adultery, then why is it that the key figures of God's prophets are all committing adultery and it's never condemned? You know what I mean? Like, it seems odd to me that people want to make that argument. So
let me ask a question that I've had about this when I've heard this same argument being discussed. I look at it and I say, okay, so he had one extra wife, right? Or, I believe it was the Moses example you were giving, that, he had another one. It's disputed whether we're not seeing 52 wives, 34 wives. And I mean, we don't see this anywhere. There isn't an example anywhere in any of the scriptures. And I look at it, and this goes back to the original question of, and I'd like you to just kind of put a seal on it for the end of this. Did Brigham Young practice a different polygamy, and thus everyone after him, a different polygamy than what Joseph Smith revealed?
Well, a difference in what way different? Like,
well,
because is it okay? I have 4 wives, you have 6 wives, therefore we're practicing different polygamy?
Or rather,
dynastic
dynastic
sealing,
with this,
spiritual wives versus,
I had kids with these 50 wives, and then Joseph had no kids with, that's the difference in the polygamy.
Yeah, you can make that argument. I don't see a major difference in it. If the Lord commanded people to be sealed to more than one woman, to take on more than one wife, that's kind of at the crux of what this is. Now, I'm not even going to say that all the polygamy that was always practiced was always done right. I'm not going to make the claim that plural marriage that mistakes weren't made. I don't deny that. I don't hold that as a possibility, but there's the sort of fundamental question here is section 132 from God? Because if it is, then it answers all these questions, and we have a specific commandment from God on that issue.
This is the biggest thing that's missing for me. And I've loved our discussion, and you're incredible, and thank you so much for being here. This is the only thing I've missed in all the records of history. Have you come across anyone that says they had a spiritual witness confirming the doctrine for themselves in a journal, a personal account? Because there's evidence of a record, but what I haven't heard yet is a testimony that, hey, by the power of the Holy Ghost, like the Book of Mormon, that this is a true doctrine, we should be practicing it.
Oh, I think that the testimonies to the rightness of polygamy, all of the polygamous wives of Joseph Smith, for instance, almost all of them that have records, when you look at what they said that they were repulsed by the doctrine initially, but that they only ended up coming to it because of a spiritual witness from God that it was true. I actually, as funny as it may sound, I want to bear my testimony that polygamy was a righteous practice implemented by Joseph Smith for the time that it was necessary to be had. I believe that the purpose of polygamy is to raise up seed unto the Lord. This does not mean to have a ton of babies. Also, Joseph Smith was killed before he had any children. I think he probably would have eventually. I think that they were going west to get away so that they could actually practice polygamy fully. Now, my testimony of it, why do I have it? It's because Jacob 2 is my go-to for polygamy. Okay. What does it do? It condemns it. And I condemn polygamy.
Just like who was it? Gordon B. Hinckley on Larry King. He said exactly what you just said. He said, I condemn polygamy. We're done with it. We're through it. We're past it. We're moving on.
I fully condemn polygamy, just like Jacob 2, but I do hold to the idea that if the Lord sees fit to raise up seed unto himself, meaning to raise up a righteous generation, a special generation, okay, then he will command it. And that's exactly what happened with the Latter-day Saints. I think that scripture is incredibly prophetic, because what happened is that polygamy formed a group of people with an absolutely unbelievable level of consecration to the Lord. And they ended up creating these special and unique family units that literally created the backbone of the church to this day. Okay? There's a reason that all these people that have all these similar last names in the church, that they exist. It's because of those polygamous families. Those polygamous families raised up under incredible challenge and duress. They put the Lord first, and that is what created our people. Okay? That is the reason that we are who we are today. And the church grew faster during the era of plural marriage and not because of a bunch of babies, but because of converts. Okay? Faster then, their rates of growth, than we even have today. And
so I got a hypothetical
I believe that there
for
is
you.
a special, just to finish up, I believe that polygamy was instituted by God. Joseph was telling the truth. Brigham Young did his best to continue the practice as directed by the Lord. Mistakes were made, but ultimately what came out of it was our people.
Yeah. And I think the Lord makes do. Like, we make decisions, we have our agency, and the Lord makes do. So here's my hypothetical for you. Do you think that we would have, let's assume in a different timeline, in another multiverse, that Joseph Smith told the angel, I'm not going to do it. And the angel goes, well, I'm not going to kill you. And so polygamy never gets practiced. Do you believe we would have more members of the church or less members of the church today if this was not a part of our history? Or do you believe that it was imperative that it needed to be a part of our history because it built that backbone? And I know it's just hypothetical and we'll never know because we know what happened.
I would say 100% that we are who we are today, and that we would have less members and the gospel would be less effective. There are so many churches out there that have been started by people who have some interpretation of the Bible or some belief system that sounds really great, and they go out and do it, right? But sort of an Abrahamic sacrifice is what makes people go to another level. And I really do believe that, in a sense, for the church and for those
it almost
early members,
forced them to move west, which created. So I see the position that you're taking. I mean, it made them very, very strong. I'm worried about today because we're so blessed that while they were very strong, we become very weak, and I'm worried about that.
That's exactly right. I think we
and
might
that's
have
a discussion that you and I should have on a whole other topic where I'm worried about our people and how soft we've become because our ancestors were gangsters.
That'd be an awesome episode.
I'm far more worried about there's an assumption that if we make it easier, then we'll get, like, let's just make things easier and then more people will want to be members of our church. That's insane. No. And everything in our history and in the history of religion will tell you the opposite. What people want is meaning. And meaning is found, I mean,
honestly,
when you are challenged.
That's why people like an Andrew Tate are leaving Christianity and becoming a Muslim, because their religion is a high demanding religion. And we used to be that. We used to be a peculiar people, and now we've sought to be accepted by the mainstream, and we've looked for easy. And I'm with you. I think it's a really slippery slope when you're looking for the easy way out and you're not being a peculiar people. And so I do agree with you that this, however the Lord chose to use this, and they made mistakes, it made our ancestors who we are today. And I'm worried that they're looking at us going, oh my gosh, what did we do here?
So you got to read, just a closing thought on that to wrap it up. We are, in my opinion, if you read the first part of Alma, the church has become wealthy and corrupt and sort of, they're living high on the hog in Zarahemla. Things are good, and they've forgotten what? Alma reminds them about the captivity of their fathers, the challenges that their people went through. That's what made you who you are. And you better not forget that. And I think that plural marriage is that was the thing that created everything the whole circumstance of all of it. So
are you familiar with Carolyn Pearson's? I haven't heard her name brought up by many people when they have this debate. Are you familiar with her position on this?
I'm not. No.
She's written a book. She's active. She's served in, church leadership in the Relief Society. And I've seen her on some stuff, but anyways, her position is that it was a mistake. So I don't know if people bring that up and say, hey, do you think potentially it was a mistake? I mean, I have a hard time personally. Like I'm telling you, I've thought about all these, like if an angel came to me with a drawn sword and said, you're going to do this, I would say, then you better kill me. And I know that goes against well, I'll do what the Lord asked me to do. But I'm like, that's one thing for me that I'm just going to be like, well, then I guess you got to kill me. And I guess I'll have to go report to the Lord that I used my agency in this way, and I'll suffer whatever the ramifications are. What do you say to people that say, hey, could Joseph Smith have been deceived by this angel?
I don't find that compelling. And frankly, one of the biggest problems is that, I mean, it's sort of like you can make that argument, but here's a big problem, especially if you go down the polygamy denier route. Okay, where are the keys? Right? So if Brigham Young was not the key holder after Joseph Smith, that means we don't have the keys and the restoration has failed. Okay.
Yeah.
Or they're somewhere else, and fine. That's one of the first.
Anytime
anytime somebody brings up like that the church didn't follow Brigham Young, I'm like, okay, who has the keys then? Because if no one has the keys,
my response is 1848, of all the places Oliver Cowdery could go, who in my opinion was receiving the most revelation out of anybody on planet Earth, or had experiences that nobody else that I'm aware of had, because the guy that had those experiences is now dead. He's got his father-in-law, who's the Whitmerites, like that's his family. He married a Whitmer. They've started their own thing. He doesn't go there. He's tight with Emma. Emma and him got along great. She's with the RLDS, and he doesn't go there. And Oliver Cowdery chooses to go back in 1848 to where Brigham Young was and where the keys were, because he knew where the keys were. Because guess who else was there when keys were given? Oliver Cowdery. Oliver Cowdery was in that Kirtland Temple in 1836 when keys were passed down with Joseph Smith, and he chose to go back to Brigham Young. And I think that's a compelling argument that we should all look at and say, what did Oliver Cowdery choose to do? And it's something that, like, I get it that we're in a place in the church where we might not be super happy with whatever's going on, but we should stay with the body of the church. And if we don't like what's going on, like, that's why I love that video that you did, because you're like, hey, I'm seeing things that I don't like, so I'm going to speak out about it. I'm not leaving the church and I'm not going against the church, but it's okay for us to say, hey, we've got to change this. And the best way to change it is from within, in my opinion. That's why I appreciate what you are doing with your channel, because you're saying, if I see something that I don't like, I'll be a Benedict and I'll say, I don't like that. I don't think this is right. So anyways, I appreciate that. In closing, I know this is a highly debated thing. And sometimes I think we can get lost in the sauce of what it is or what it isn't. But the most important thing is the Savior Jesus Christ and everything. And so maybe in closing, to kind of wrap it up, maybe just tell me a little bit about, let's talk about the Savior to close this thing up.
Yeah. One quick thing with what you said on it being a debated topic. Actually, amongst professional historians and people that are like at the highest levels of history, they don't actually debate this topic because the historical record's so clear. But I can definitely see how it can be a stumbling block that people have in the church, and I get it. Like I don't go against that at all. I think that we have to deal with the implications of the fact that the Savior rose from the dead, and we are seeking the keys that he gave to his original disciples, right? One of the real challenges in this whole debate is where it leads people. It leads people away from the priesthood keys, okay? That's why if you want to, it isn't just a historical sort of oddity that's at stake here. What's at stake is that people then abandon the keys
Everything
of the
else.
kingdom. And it was Christ who gave those keys to us. And so my advice to everyone is to seek the keys of the kingdom so that you can have bound in heaven and on earth through that power, right? That's what the church is here to do. It is to bind us together with one another and with God. And that authority only exists within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, under the direction of the one person on earth to hold all priesthood keys, President Russell M. Nelson. And none of this history changes that fact. That is a fact, and that's my testimony.
Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on. Now we've got both sides of the argument. So all of you that are like, hey, you're interviewing these guys, you need to interview Jacob Hansen. Well, we just did it for you. And I think with all of this stuff, like, you should study it out in your minds and decide for yourself. So thank you, Jacob, for coming on. For myself, I'm Shane Baldwin. For David Douglas, Trevor Keys. We'll see you all next time.